So, for
But
example,
that isn't what's happening, is it? That isn't what's
well,
happening. What's
The
happening
opposite,
is
surely,
the
what's
opposite.
happening.
Dialogue is leading to confusion, ambiguity, and then you have people like Father James Martin going out, making statements that put words in the Pope's mouth that people then run with in this fast-paced media age. And there's a problem there, as Mark
Yeah,
said, and
there's a
we're
problem.
lay parents. We're lay parents.
Yes.
We're teaching children in schools. We're catechists. We have our own children to
Yes.
raise in this world, and we need the church to stand firm. Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Catherine Bennett.
And I'm Mark Lambert.
And backed by popular demand is Father Alexander Lucie-Smith, our friend and regular on our show, fan of the show, and he's a Catholic priest and author. His books are linked to which you can find below. So we thought we'd catch up with you this week, Father, and talk about what's been going on in the church. How are you?
I'm very well. I mean, autumn is coming. Summer's date hath but too short a lease, but the Catholic Church goes on, whatever the season. So I'm cheerful.
Good. Well, we've got a story to begin with, which I know you'd wanted to speak about. Is actually, Mark, sorry. Do you want to start with Father James, and then we'll talk about the canonisations after?
Well, I don't know. Let's do the happy stuff first, shall we?
Shall we?
Canonization, because I think that is really great news for the church, isn't it, Father? And you're very excited about it.
I'm very excited about the canonisations. Very excited indeed. It was a bit of a blow that they got cancelled, but of course they had to be cancelled because there was no Pope. For me, the high point of the canonization is going to be when Pope Leo utters that one word, discernimus. We discern, we recognize that these two young men are saints in heaven with God. One of the things is the Catholic Church does not create saints. King Charles creates knights and he creates life peers. And I suppose he could create hereditary peers as well. And the king is the fount of honor. The Catholic Church recognizes saints and, of course, authorizes their cult, which means authorizes liturgies, masses, or it publishes the liturgies, the Mass of Saint Carlo Acutis, as it will be, and the Mass of Saint Pier Giorgio Frassati. It gives them feast days and it authorizes the devotion to the saint, but it doesn't make them saints. It's not like you suddenly get promoted. Some people think that we make saints. That's absolutely untrue. Discernimus. We discern that the person who's made these two a saint is God himself. And that's really important. And what was God thinking when he poured out his graces upon these two, and these two accepted these graces? What is God thinking? Well, we cannot possibly know because his thoughts are high above our thoughts, aren't they? But there is a message here. And for me, I remember when I went, it was during the first summer of COVID. In fact, it was about October. I went to Assisi. I was in Umbria and everybody was still wearing masks and so on. And I went to Assisi and they just had the beatification of the Blessed Carlo, which had been a rather low-key affair because of the various restrictions. Everybody was wearing masks and so on. They had it inside the church. There were lots of little signs all over Assisi saying beatification this way with pictures of the Blessed Carlo. And I went to what the Italians call il santuario della spoliazione, literally the sanctuary of the stripping, the place where Saint Francis took off his clothes in front of the bishop and the townspeople of Assisi, the former cathedral of Assisi. Santa Maria Maggiore is its dedication. And I went there and I joined a lot of people in a queue and went past the tomb of the Blessed Carlo, which they'd removed these sort of side panels so you could actually see in at the relics. And I just felt at that moment this enormous sense of power coming out of those relics. It was something quite extraordinary. I've never really experienced anything like that from relics before. And I then wrote an article which was published in a well-known English weekly, namely the Tablet, about my visit to the relics. And all these people queuing up outside. I got shouted at by several policemen, but that because I wasn't queuing properly or something. You know, Italians are very keen on queuing properly, aren't they? I believe, and everything has to be very well organised in Italy. So I got shouted at by a policeman. It was water off a duck's back because I just felt that this was just so important. Then I went to Perugia and I went into the sisters of the Paulines, and I'd known them in Africa. And I asked about a few people I'd known in Africa. And the nun behind the desk said, you know, the Paulines are the ones who run the bookshops. She said, oh, the church is in such a terrible state in Italy. It's awful. And I said, haha, you think Italy's bad? I was in Assisi the other day, I said, and I saw lots and lots of young people, lots of young religious going around in their habits. And I thought, you know, I said, maybe in Italy the church is shrinking, but the church in Italy is alive. I think possibly the church in England's in a really bad way. And most of us think that the church where we are is always in a very bad way, and where it's other places in a good way. And she said, okay, yes, I suppose so. I said, listen, the thing that really gives me hope right now is the beatification of the Blessed Carlo Acutis. This is a huge sign of the renewal of the church. And this is where the renewal of the church will come from. It won't come from some geezer like me talking on the internet. It will come from the witness of heroic lives. Now, if you think back to Assisi, I'm sure you've both seen that brilliant film by Franco Zeffirelli called Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
It's stunningly good. It's very 70s. It's got that guy called, that folk singer called Donovan, sort of crooning away in the background. But that's okay. And it's a stunning film. And at the end, St. Francis comes into the Lateran Basilica, it's supposed to be. In fact, it's the famous basilica in Monreale in Sicily. And Zeffirelli really went over the top in that scene. Zeffirelli was a great guy. He was always looking for the top so he could go over it. And Leo McKern is the Pope. And you may remember the Pope had this vision or this dream that he was in bed and the Lateran was falling down. And a little brother came and he supported the church and he stopped the Lateran from falling down. And that is illustrated by Giotto in the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. Anyway, Leo McKern meets the actor playing St. Francis, and he said, and some cardinal says to some other magnificently apparelled cardinal, this is the man who will bring the common people back to the church. And for me, this is the high point of the film. Zeffirelli was a rather strange man in many respects, but he was an enthusiastic and devout Catholic. He was so Catholic, it just sort of, you know. Anyway, and I didn't know Zeffirelli, but I did know quite a few people who did, funnily enough. Anyway, and if you go outside the Lateran, at the end of the esplanade, going towards the church founded by that famous Essex girl, you know the one I mean, Saint Helen, Santa Croce in Jerusalem, which is where Saint Helen, who was born in Colchester, lived. Just facing the Lateran is this statue of these 6 friars in their rags, kneeling down, with joy on their faces, seeing the Lateran, seeing the seat of the Pope, when they'd walked all the way from Assisi. And for me, St. Francis's dedication to the Pope is just so absolutely wonderful. And it's something mirrored by the Blessed Carlo Acutis, because the Blessed Carlo Acutis said when he was in hospital, age 15 and a half, dying of leukemia, he said 2 things. There are lots of people who are worse off than me. And he said, I offer all my sufferings for Pope Benedict XVI and the good of the church. And this love of the Pope and love of the church was something that really, really pulsated in the being of Carlo Acutis, as it did in St. Francis. Now, and of course, Carlo Acutis loved going to Assisi. He loved praying in all the shrines of Assisi. And of course, he asked to be buried in Assisi. And there he is, in the place where, if you like, St. Francis announced his vocation to the world. It's beautifully filmed by Zeffirelli in that thing. the bishop is amazingly fat and gluttonous and so on and hilarious. The quite unlike a modern bishop, I have to say. And where St. Francis began his mission is where the Blessed Carlo continues his mission, in that church, where you feel this immense power. Now, I went back to Assisi last year, and I was staying in Assisi in a little hotel with a friend of mine who's a priest. And I said to him, as I always say to everybody, so what did you think was the best thing about Assisi? And there's so much in Assisi that's wonderful. San Damiano just blows your mind. The place where St. Clare died. The relics of St. Clare, the relics of St. Francis, that amazing church decorated by Giotto. And he said, oh, no question, it's the Blessed Carlo. And for me, I think he's right. I think he's right. Now, for me, there's one very special place in Assisi, and that is when you walk down the hill and you walk towards Santa Maria degli Angeli, where St. Francis had this vision of the angels, and the Blessed Virgin Mary said, anybody who comes here will have all their sins forgiven. Whereupon St. Francis spoke to the Pope and he said, okay, there's a plenary indulgence I'm giving for all who go on pilgrimage on a certain day. It's called the Pardon of Assisi. And it's, of course, where St. Francis died. And St. Francis was brought back to this tiny little church at Santa Maria degli Angeli, and he was blind. And he was being carried there. And he stopped at a certain place, and they pointed him towards Assisi, which he could barely make out. And there's a plaque by the side of the road saying, this is the place where our father, St. Francis, stopped. And he said, oh, Assisi, you will be I can't remember the exact words, a sacramental, is what he was saying, for all the peoples to come. So many people will come to Assisi and find grace in Assisi. Now, the Blessed, so he was predicting what the Blessed Carlo would do and what millions of other people have done. And of course, Assisi is a place of grace. I think the only phrase I can use is it's a portal. You can feel the grace flowing out from the tomb of the Blessed Carlo. So for me, the Blessed Carlo is incredibly important. I'll tell you another thing about the Blessed Carlo. With this friend of mine I was with in Assisi, he's a great walker. We walked out to this place that St. Francis used to stay at. It's called the Hermitage or something. It's an awful walk. It's uphill and so on. I was exhausted. It's about 5 miles. And it takes you into the hills around Assisi, where, funnily enough, the Blessed Carlo used to exercise his dog, his several dogs. And the famous photograph of the Blessed Carlo is him with this mountain as the background. Assisi sort of on the spur of the mountains. And obviously they were walking with the dog in the last summer of his life. He died in October, so he was 15, but he was quite tall, and he was quite grown up looking. And obviously his mother or his father took a photograph of him. And this photograph is now the basis of the standard holy picture of the Blessed Carlo. And it's also going to be used, it was used at the beatification, it was slightly sort of modified at the beatification, the picture of the Blessed Carlo. And it's going to be used as the tapestry outside St. Peter's when the canonization happens this Sunday. Now, for me, it's incredibly, I don't know, I think theologically very profound that this snap that his mother took of him is now an icon. Now, you've both taken photographs of your children, but they're just family photographs. I was photographed, I suppose, as a child. Though rather sadly, very few photographs of me survive as a child. It's rather a pity, I feel. You take these photographs and you treasure them, and then the photograph becomes, that's the photo. Actually, they've changed the background in that one. They've changed the background. But that photograph of him is now the holy picture. So how is it the family snapshot becomes the icon of a saint? What this is showing us is the way that the grace of God glorifies and sanctifies the everyday, the ordinary. An ordinary boy is taken, has a photograph taken by his rather ordinary mother with an ordinary camera, and this now becomes a holy picture. Now, this is the message to me is the sanctification of the ordinary, the sanctification of what the Italians call il quotidiano, of the everyday. Give us this day our daily bread, the daily aspect. Life is boring. Every day is the same as every other day, but every day can be a day in which we meet God and we are sanctified by God, and God is glorified by our sanctification. The glory of God is man alive, as Saint Irenaeus said.
Yeah. Thank you, Father. I'm glad that you began by explaining that the church doesn't make saints, because I do think this is a misunderstood concept in the church, and that the church recognizes that a saint, which is the destination for all of us, this is another thing I try and impart to young people. Saints shouldn't be out of the ordinary, extreme weirdos. We're all called to be saints. And it's merely recognizing that they are in heaven with God. And especially the reason that's important is because we saw soon after Pope Francis died, prayers to him saying he's in heaven. And of course, we don't know. It's the church who can say, we recognize this person is in heaven. There may be lots of anonymous saints in our own family. We don't know. But the point is, we don't know.
Yeah.
So one of the ways in which we do know is through miracles. So can you just tell us a little about the miracles attributed?
I don't know much about them, actually. There was this lady who was cured in Brazil of some horrible cancer, and she was expected to die, and she made a miraculous recovery because she prayed to the Blessed Carlo. And there have been miracles attributed to Pier Giorgio Frassati as well, but I don't really know very much about them. For me, the miracle is usually taken as the confirmation that the discernment process is correct. It's God putting his stamp on the human discernment process. Now, you're absolutely right. We discern saints, and there has to be a discernment process. There was a little bit of a hiccup with Pier Giorgio Frassati back in the day. The discernment process, the processo, the canonization process was halted for a few years because they thought they'd discovered something about him which wasn't quite right. And then other people said, no, this is not correct, and so on. And similarly, the discernment process has got to be done quite rigorously, I think. And in both cases, it has been done quite rigorously. There was a rather bad article, in my humble opinion, in the highly respected Economist about the Blessed Carlo and the canonization process. And one of the things it seemed to say, as if it had made a huge discovery, is that one of the people behind the canonization process was his mother. Now, the truth of the matter is, if his mother had been against the canonization process, it would never have happened. So she had to be on board with the canonization process. But I felt that this huge scoop by the Economist, namely that some Italian mothers could be quite pushy, was a bit of a damp squib between you and me. Because funnily enough, those of us who know anything about the Catholic Church know that behind every great man is a great woman, and it's usually his mother. Don Bosco's mother was a great woman, and she was really pushy. And the fact that Don Bosco got anywhere in his earthly career was because of his mother, because she made huge sacrifices for him. And of course, the Salesians are trying to, I think they may have started her canonization process as well. They call her Mother Margaret, if you speak English. But otherwise, I think she's called Mamarita, I think so. La Mamma is rather important in Italy, but nobody's told the Economist. Incidentally, there was, and people can look it up, and you can possibly put the link up, there was an what's the word I'm looking for? An article in a highly respected English newspaper, much beloved by many, called The Guardian, about the canonization of the Blessed Carlo Acutis. And it was astonishing. It could have appeared in the Universe, frankly, or the Catholic Herald, or indeed it was a really good article. It was
unusual for the Guardian.
Yeah, and it had a lot of. I don't think that's it. They had a lot of stuff about the miracles and so on. It was It was a brilliant article. It was a brilliant article. It was a lovely, lovely article. Now,
well, there are Father, many in the Catholic world, certainly a number I've seen, who are saying it's too soon and are quite critical about the canonization. What do you have to say to them?
What I have to say to them is this: the greatest miracle of Carlo Acutis is possibly that article in The Guardian, and it's possibly the fact that, having been a totally ordinary boy, although there were one or two extraordinary things about him, and having died in obscurity, he just goes from, he's now more and more known, and his fame has spread. Incidentally, if you look at the people who aren't saints, they tend to have amazing lives while they're happily still with us. Then they die and they're forgotten. And you do get quite a lot of people who are talked up by everybody, and then suddenly, you know, they disappear from the scene, and that's it. This is somebody who lived a, if not quite a hidden life, but a life that wasn't particularly noteworthy from the worldly point of view. I don't think he ever appeared in the papers while he was alive, but ever since his death, he's just more and more, we've heard more and more and more about him. People have said it's too soon. Well, I think one of the things is this. Carlo Acutis is our contemporary, because I think he died in did he die in 1996? I think he did. Something like that. Was it 1996? Yeah, the year of my, was that the year of my ordination, or was I ordained in 1990? Yes, the year of my ordination. He died in the year of my ordination.
2006.
He didn't die in 2006, did he? Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, he's, yeah, I thought he'd be, okay. Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Well, it's your brain versus Google. So
okay, fine. Google's right. What was I saying? Tell me, remind my brain what I was saying. Yes, he died relatively recently. He is our contemporary, and I think it's very important to show that contemporary young people are called to sanctity, and contemporary young people can be holy, and contemporary young people can give a witness to Christ. Now, I think if you leave it 100 years, I think that immediate impact is lost. And that's why I think, yes, it has been in something of a hurry, or it has been done with dispatch, but I think that's quite a good thing. Now, of course, at the same time, we haven't talked really about Pier Giorgio Frassati. Pier Giorgio Frassati died in the 1920s. And I think he was born in 1900, wasn't he? And he died in 1924. Pier Giorgio Frassati is our contemporary as well, insofar as he did all these things that a lot of Italians are crazy about. They love mountain climbing, Italians, and they love that sort of thing. The other thing Italians love, and this you see with the Blessed Pier Giorgio and much less with the Blessed Carlo, the Italians love star insieme, which means literally being together, which we interpret as hanging out. And they love hanging out in large groups. And the Blessed Pier Giorgio was a very social sort of person. He was always going with groups of friends up the mountains and so on. And he was also working in Catholic action. And he was also helping the poor and so on in groups. He was, if you like, an activist, to use a modern phrase. He was an animator, to use another very modern phrase, of the people around him. Pier Giorgio was also, like the Blessed Carlo, from a very rich, privileged family. His father was a very important man. He was an ambassador. He was also the proprietor of Italy's most important newspaper. Pier Giorgio was also quite political in that he was rather against the regime that was ruling Italy in his last years, namely the fascists. Pier Giorgio was also fascinating, and this is rather interesting. Well, at least I think so. Whereas Blessed Carlo is associated with Assisi, Pier Giorgio is associated with Turin. Now, I don't know how many of all our viewers will know about Assisi. And all our viewers, I bet, will want to go to Assisi if they haven't been already, and should go. Turin is also like Assisi, because Turin is the city of Don Bosco. Turin is the city of the Blessed Alemanno, and Turin is also the city of the Blessed Cafasso. Now,
not to mention the Shroud.
And it's also the city of the Shroud. It's also the city of endless members of the Savoyard royal family who were canonized and made blesseds. The Blessed Cavasso, Father Cavasso, and Father Alemanno are incredibly important people for the Catholic Church. And as for Don Bosco, he comes second only to St. Francis. Don Bosco is the most wonderful, bright, brilliant, and shining light for the Catholic Church today. Now, Turin was the first city in Italy, more or less, to industrialize. Turin was the place where children went around barefoot. Turin was the place of the most appalling, grinding poverty alongside its huge prosperity. And Don Bosco, like the Blessed Pier Giorgio, was deeply concerned about the poverty of the people of Turin. And of course, we have this lovely story of the Blessed Pier Giorgio. People came to the door to beg. And you know, even when I was a small child in Malta, people would come to the front door to beg. And it was a thing. You don't do it nowadays, but it was a thing, particularly in Italy. You'd come to beg at the door saying, could I have some food or something like that? And this woman came with a child who had no shoes. And the Blessed Pier Giorgio took off his shoes and gave them to the child. And that is important, I think, because, you know, so many people want to politicize poverty and sort of talk about institutional whatever. Whereas, in fact, what you need to do with poverty, and this, of course, the Marxists hate this, is you need to take your shoes off and give them to somebody who doesn't have any shoes. Whereas the Marxists say, oh, no, you mustn't do that, because what you've got to do is you've got to overthrow the system that creates shoelessness. And so we talk about systems and we forget about people. The Blessed Cavasso, incidentally, used to go around, his big thing was to go and sit with people who were condemned to death and to cheer them up or to give them spiritual succor. And the Blessed Alemanno is the one who was so devoted to Our Lady of Consolation, who's the one who founded the Consolata missionaries and who sent those missionaries to Nairobi and to Kenya back in the day. I mean, more or less before anybody else went to Kenya. And this is why Consolata is a very popular girl's name in Kenya. And of course, the place that's more important than any other in Turin is the Sanctuary of the Consolata, which is this incredibly beautiful church, which inspired the Blessed Alemanno. And indeed, everybody else who goes there will be inspired. Trust me, I've been, I know.
This, just briefly before we move on to another piece of news, that's something that Pope Benedict XVI addressed brilliantly, I think. I've mentioned a number of times, is the temptations of our Lord in the desert. And in it, he says, wouldn't a saviour get rid of poverty? Wouldn't that be the act of a saviour, to first eradicate poverty? And he addresses that exact point you've made brilliantly there, that kind of Marxist ideology versus a true self-sacrificial Christian way of being.
Jesus just talked to people, didn't he? He didn't actually sort of say, I've got this great new theory which is going to change everything. I've got this, you've got to stop thinking in this way, you've got to start thinking in that way. He actually didn't do that. He just talked to people.
He just gave himself.
Stuff. He gave himself. Yeah, I think that's, and I mean, Don Bosco was politically quite astute.
He gives himself.
But he too was, I suppose, an activist, as somebody who, you know, did stuff. He talked to people rather than outlining a new political theory. Yeah. We've got too many theories. We don't have enough people doing stuff.
And we've only got one person who gives himself to us daily in the Mass, and that's Christ.
The solution,
it's not theory he's giving, it's himself.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The solution to the world's problems is a person, Jesus Christ. The truth is a person, Jesus Christ. We don't need to go into a lecture hall and to have lectures on Marxism or anything else. We need to get to know Jesus Christ.
Yeah, thank you. Brilliant. Mark, what's next?
Oh, I feel like this is the wrong direction to take it now. But we wanted to address the problems that, well, what everyone's talking about this week, Father, is obviously the fact that the Pope received Father James Martin in an audience, and it was a public audience, wasn't it? It was. Now, it was in the Bulletino, and it was sort of, there were pictures taken, etc., etc., and like the reaction has been catastrophic, and it's very polarized. You know, that there are literally people saying, "This is it. I can't be a Catholic anymore." I know it's sad, but like, I think we have to take it seriously, that because it's a continuation of a problem that has, you know, for those of us who are, you know, lay people, we have committed our lives to the faith. And when you're committed to the faith, all you're asking for is for the head of the church to support what the church is supposed to teach. And when you see something like this, you can understand, even if there are reasons or excuses or whatever, why you might think, well, this is the Pope turning his back on the faith. And I mean, those reasons were laid out. They've recently been, I mean, there are lots of examples, and I've been tracking James Martin for a long while, but like, you know, there's lots of articles like this that just go through all the different things that James Martin does to attack the faith, you know, like the things that he teaches that are in direct contradiction to what the faith teaches. And like, there's a brilliant article by Phil Lawler in Catholic Culture, this article here, which sort of, you know, it really addresses it well. You know, the problem between the fact that, look, we want the Pope to meet people, we want him to discuss things with people, but in this instance, we all must have known, you know, the Pope's not an idiot. He must have known what reaction this would bring from the faithful. And so it sends a message, and the message it sends is a message of continuity with the confusion of Pope Francis, which contradicts what the church teaches.
Well, Father James Martin, SJ, had a private audience with the Pope, a one-to-one with the Pope. I mean, there might have been a few flunkies around. The Pope was behind his desk. Father Martin was in front of the desk, sitting down. That's a private audience with the Pope is quite an honor. And so how do you get a private audience with the Pope? Well, your name's on a list. I don't know if you know this. It's a bit tragic for you and me and all of us. There is a list, and if your name's not on it, well, you can forget about it. Well, this is true. I'll explain. There used to be a very specially curated list of people who are called privilegiati di Stato, privileged of state. And if you were on this list, you could have personal access to the Holy Father. Nowadays, there's still a list, but it's curated, I think, in a different way. It means, for example, heads of state would have automatic the right of entry, the entree into the Vatican to the Holy Father. If, let's say, heads of state, Italian politicians, parliamentarians, probably would go in bigger groups, actually. People like you and me, if you, for example, you're getting married, you can go to the general audience and you wear your wedding dress and so on, and you're taken up to the front and the Pope will just say a few words to you, but there'll be 2,000 other people there, but you won't get a private audience. Now, why is Father Martin on the list? I suppose Father Martin is on several lists, isn't he? Because if you remember, he went to the Met Gala a few years ago. So he was on that, along with, I don't know who, but some incredibly important and influential people in the United States, like Beyonce and Anna Nuclear Winter, those sort of people. So he's up there with the greats.
Whoopi Goldberg.
Whoopi Goldberg. Oh my God, what I wouldn't do to have a one-to-one with Whoopi Goldberg. But, you know, sadly, I don't know any celebrities at all. I just lead a miserable life. Oh, my goodness. I'm looking out the window. It started to rain. Yeah, well.
You're near me, Father. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So Father Martin is on the list. Father Martin is on the list, I'm speculating, because he's got a huge following in America. He's got a hinterland. Now, there would be 5 or 6 American cardinals, perhaps, all of whom think Father Martin is a really important person. His views are really important. And Father Martin is somebody who needs to be listened to. So therefore, the Pope received Father Martin. It's as simple as that. Because Father Martin represents a constituency in the church, whether we like it or not. Now, I immediately want to go on to something else. You might remember some years ago, Jörg Haider, who was an extreme right-wing Austrian politician, got to visit the Vatican and be received by the Pope, along with about 30 other people, because he was presenting the Christmas tree for the Vatican to the Holy Father, because the Christmas tree that year, because he was the head of the Austrian province where the Christmas tree had been grown. And a whole load of people went berserk and demonstrated and this, that, and the other. And it was pointed out, well, this is the way it is. You know, Jörg Haider, because he was bringing the Christmas tree, he had to be received by the Pope. Again, a lot of people, English people, got really uppity about the fact that the late comrade Robert Mugabe, president of Zimbabwe, was received by the Pope on several occasions. That was because he was a head of state, and the Pope doesn't refuse any head of state. The other thing was, of course, Mugabe couldn't go anywhere else. Nobody else would have him. The same would apply to Putin, by the way. If Putin asks for an interview with the Pope, he'll get one. Back in the day, in the 1930s, Mussolini was received by Pope Pius XII. If Hitler had asked to see Pope Pius XII, Pope Pius XII would have received him. It's protocol. You listen to all parties. Hitler, yeah. Haider, yeah. Mugabe, yeah. Also, the mullahs from wherever it is, they get invited to everything.
So why not James Martin then?
Yeah, so if Hitler can come, say James Martin can come. What the Pope is the Pope of unity, and he doesn't want to, he receives everybody. So it's true, he had Cardinal Burke in the other day, which was lovely to see, and also he's got Father James Martin in. Father James Martin is a person of some weight in the Catholic Church. Now, what people are jumping, the conclusion people are jumping to is that the Pope agrees with everything Father Martin says. I don't think that's true in the least, any more than St. John Paul II agreed with everything that George Haider thought, or indeed that Pope Benedict XVI agreed with everything that comrade Robert Mugabe had to say, or indeed that Pius XII agreed with Mussolini, or indeed with Hitler. Pius XII, I imagine General Franco would have been in the Vatican on a regular basis as well, because not very many people were keen to have him. It's the Pope has people, but now why does the Pope have anybody? Because you could say, well, first of all, it's to avoid the fact of saying, oh, no, sorry, we can't have you because X, and we can't have you because of Y, and having a huge hoo-ha every time. Okay, you have an occasional hoo-ha about who comes. The other thing is this, is the Vatican, and not just the Vatican, the Catholic Church, which includes you and me, is committed to dialogue. This means we talk to the mullahs in Iran. This means, even though we don't have diplomatic relationships with them, we talk to the royal family of Saudi Arabia. This means we talk to all sorts of really quite vile people, to tell you the truth. Don't forget, MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, is the guy who had that unfortunate journalist chopped up and just thrown down the well. That's why it's called MBS Mohammed Bonesaw. We talk to him, and God forbid, we even talk to the Chinese. I think that with some of these people, we shouldn't be talking to. Well, I don't know. We're committed to dialogue. We're also committed to ecumenism. So we talk to all Christian groups, all baptized groups, and so on. And that is the way it is. I would say that maybe in meeting Father James Martin, let's get back to the subject, our beloved Holy Father is trying to convert him. That's what I would say. He's trying to say, look here, are you really sure about all this stuff? Aren't you digging yourself into a bit of a hole? Don't you want to do what Jesuits are supposed to do? And that is to show your huge loyalty to the church and its teaching.
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah.
Well, it would be nice.
I thought that was a very good point that you made about the lobby, and it's a point that Phil Lawler makes in that article as well, that Supich, obviously, he's sort of saying that he's a big promoter, and that when a critique was written of James Martin's book, Building a Bridge, by another Jesuit, Supich actually rung up that Jesuit superior because he was in Chicago and demanded that he be disciplined, sort of thing. So
God.
you could, it's that's an important thing, isn't it? The lobbying groups that are behind these things. And if he's got a group of cardinals, which he clearly has from the endorsements in his books, etc.,
Yes. Oh, yes,
behind him, then you know they want him to be seen, don't they?
The Holy Father cannot afford to cheese off a large section of the Catholic Church in America. Mind you, large is probably not the word, a vocal section and a high profile section. But, one of the things I would just ask is this: who's behind Father Martin? I don't mean like who's paying him or but who are his followers? Because I don't think they're that many. I don't think that there is a groundswell of a support that says, Father Martin, you are the best, and yours is the way to go. I think Father Martin, like so many other people who rather went out on a limb in recent years, we need to lead him back to the mainstream, which hopefully he has not totally abandoned. And I think, one of the things is the dialogue about the church's teaching on sexual matters must go on. How are we, and this is a good question, to integrate all people into the Catholic Church? The Catholic Church proclaims the good news of Jesus Christ. It's good news for everybody. How are we to make sure that all people, wherever they're coming from,
but has the church not always done that, Father? What need is there what dialogue must take place to ensure that people who have always been welcome, always loved, to whom Christ has come, that there needs to be a new solution to that?
I don't think there's got to be a new solution. I'm not saying let's have a new solution.
So what's the purpose in dialogue if there's
The purpose in dialogue is to make more actual, to make more comprehensible, to make more transparent the perennial teaching of the church. So, for example...
That isn't what's happening, is it? That isn't what's happening. What's happening is the opposite. Dialogue is leading to confusion, ambiguity, and then you have people like Father James Martin going out, making statements that put words in the Pope's mouth that people then run with in this fast-paced media age. And there's a problem there, as Mark said, and we're lay parents. Yes. We're teaching children in schools, we're catechists, we have our own children to raise in this world, and we need the church to stand firm.
Yeah. Let me tell you what dialogue I have in mind. If I was in a room with Father James Martin, I would say to him, Father, do you want the Catholic Church to change its teaching on sexual morality? And what would he reply? He'd be in a bind. He'd reply, if he says yes, I'd say, but hang on a sec. The Catholic Church has received its teaching from Jesus Christ and the tradition passed on by the tradition of the church. How could it be changed now? You can't. To change the Catholic Church is essentially, in this respect, to destroy the Catholic Church. He'd have to say, no, of course, I don't want to change the Catholic Church's teaching. What I want is to make the Catholic Church's teaching more actual, and then we could take the dialogue on from there. Now, how, for example, thou shalt not commit adultery is not going to change. But one of the things that we can still talk about is how are married people to live out their married chastity and their commitment to each other more effectively in the 21st century. That is something we can talk about, because don't forget, adultery is never going to come into the Catholic mainstream, but adultery keeps on changing in the sense that our conception of what is adultery keeps on changing. So, for example, let me just say this. I don't know, there was a lady, this has happened several times, I know several people have done this, who've gone downstairs thinking, why isn't my husband coming up to bed? And discovered the husband hunched over the computer, looking at stuff he should not be looking at. Was that husband committing adultery? He certainly was in his heart. Was she right to phone the police and dob him in? Would she be right to phone the police and dob him in if the pornography he was looking at was illegal? That's a question. I mean, yes, she would be completely right. Oh, no, maybe not. Maybe she should do something else and so on. But, that is one of the the conversations we need to have. We have to have a huge conversation about pornography. Nobody wants to have it, by the way. And we have to have a huge conversation about children and pornography. And we also have to have a huge conversation about how we tell children what used to be called, when I was a child, the facts of life. How we bring children up to be responsible human beings in that sphere.
It's very hard to have those conversations when you say we're going to approach the culture as it is and adopt certain terms like LGBTQ and say, okay, but we're doing it out of love. Okay, but Jesus loves you even though you're homosexual, as he always has done. But there is a problem with even adopting. We have to not give even a little to this kind of this kind of cultural push for this LGBT stuff, because when you give a little, that's when it's very hard to say, well, we accept these terms, we're all in a big tent, and now let's talk about pornography and how awful that is. Well, we've already capitulated a little bit, haven't we?
I remember, Father, when I was at Maryvale, we were when we did anthropology, this was one of the things that we talked about, that the church would never accept LGBT or similar acronyms because they were a false anthropology that idolize a sexual drive instead of putting the Imago Dei, like at the center of what the human person is. And yet, obviously, we've ditched that over the last decade with Pope Francis, which, has been distressing, because I've got a son who struggles with same-sex attraction, and it's a constant discussion and difficulty and argument. He has to feel that he's welcome in the church, as you said, and he does. And we have those discussions, and obviously my approach to it is just to tell him how much he's loved and always loved. But at the same time, there's all these messages and signals coming out of the Vatican that seem to be saying, oh, things are changing, and you can have a gay marriage now, and you can, but like you can see, I know that's if you strictly look at the documents and all that, but you can see how people who want it to change in a certain direction see it changing in that direction, don't they? They read into it.
Let's go back to the beginning. When you're in dialogue with somebody, you've got to be very sure about the ground on which you're standing, because otherwise you've got nothing to bring to the dialogue. And the other thing is, if you're not sure about the ground on which you're standing, you will eventually, fall off a cliff or something like that. You'll be swallowed alive by the ground beneath your feet. We've got to be sure of the ground on which we're standing. So when we come to dialogue, as Catholics, believing the fullness of the Catholic faith. Now, there was another point I was going to make, but it was clean flown out of my mind. The language and the LGBT thing. Oh yes, the other quote is this: when we come to dialogue as Catholics, we come having something to offer, and one of the things, we come as critical friends to the culture. We are counter-cultural in so many regards, and of course, a lot of our culture has swallowed a whole load of stupid ideas and imprecision with language, and which makes dialogue completely impossible. So the very first thing we have to do is challenge their language. In philosophical terms, it all depends what you mean by is, to quote the Bill Clinton. They use the word is in a way that we would never use the word is. So, for example, and they also, so you might remember the very famous Andrea Dworkin, the well-known, you don't? The well-known feminist icon.
Feminist,
who said, I liked her because she was not frightened of anyone. She was actually quite a frightening lady herself, which was good. She was tough. She was the one who announced to the world, all sex is rape. And so you have to challenge that. What do you mean by all sex? What do you mean by rape? And what do you mean by is? So that's three mistakes in one very short sentence there. No, that's not true that all sex is rape. And she said there was an innate imbalance in power between men and women. And until that was sorted out, there was, everything was off the table. She did have a bit of a point there. it has to be said. Well, Andrea Dawkins was an incredibly intelligent woman, and she was not wrong about everything. Now, one of the things in our dialogue is we've got to challenge the imprecision of language. We've got to challenge that which can be challenged as not right. And at the same time, we've also got to say, but you may have a point about that. And Andrea Dawkins, I don't think had anything nice to say about the Catholic Church, but she did have one or two things that we should pay attention to. That's dialogue.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, we are committed as Catholics to dialogue with everybody. And so it can be pretty disheartening because most of our dialogues don't get very far, but we are committed to dialogue.
Yeah, I think it's the public nature of, sorry, Mark, I just think that's one thing to have that dialogue, which is important for the reasons you've said, but it's the public nature of everything. It's thrown out to everyone before there's even some resolution to that dialogue. And that's what's so confusing in the culture for parents and catechists.
He was always going to see Father James Martin. He was always going to see Father James Martin. One of the things is, don't forget, do you remember, I wrote this, I think, on my Substack. When you are a parish priest and you come into your new parish, don't change everything all at once, because the former parish priest will have his residual fan club there, and they've got feelings. You don't want to cheese them off too much. And let's remember to use a lovely phrase that our friends love to use. We don't so much. There are a lot of people out there who are hurting right now. And we don't want to, some of the cheerleaders of the late Holy Father, we don't want to make their pain any worse. And of course, Father James Martin was a huge cheerleader of the late Holy Father. There are others as well. And we want them to heal. Pope Leo is the Pope of unity, and he's the Pope of healing. We have had quite a lot of self-inflicted wounds in the Catholic Church in the last decade or so, and we need those wounds to heal. There are a lot of hurting people in the Catholic Church, including, I think, ourselves. I hate to sound like a 70s sort of psychoanalyst, but are you hurting? Yes, I think we were for a long time, and we need to be healed. We need to be loved, and let's admit the other side, or there are no two sides of the Catholic Church.
Some of us need a slap round the face, Father, but okay.
I know. That's part of our therapy, a slap round the face. But we also need a hug from time to time.
Yeah.
That's brilliantly done. Yeah, thanks. I suppose, I mean, it really does help me to understand it, Father. I think I just felt that everything he'd done so far, like Pachamama and, like the things that he'd addressed, Pope Leo, he had done so very elegantly. He'd avoided that head-on conflict. All he'd done is sort of restate what the church teaches without being too confrontational. He'd affirmed the people who are worried about the environment and all that sort of thing. And while I understand that I think this is a very sore topic for parents, especially who have to deal with this sort of thing, and as well as, like Catherine says, teachers and catechists and people like that. And I remember when he met Nancy Pelosi, when Benedict XVI met Nancy Pelosi, afterwards he issued a statement which said, that what he'd said to Nancy Pelosi, because he was aware of the fact, as the Catechism says, it's a great sin to cause scandal. Yes. And yet this is so obviously going to cause scandal, and there's silence from the Vatican, and that's really what is the problem, isn't it?
Benedict XVI did not allow his photograph to be taken with Nancy Pelosi, which I thought was rather important, because otherwise it would have been used for political purposes. Don't forget that Pope Leo, I'm sure, probably already has received the person who in England is called Meloni, but in Italy she's called Meloni, and the Prime Minister of Italy, and so on and so forth. And there is a great tradition in Italy in receiving politicians from across the spectrum. The communists would never come. They would always refuse to go, and the radicals would refuse to go, who are the extreme anti-clericals. However, if you might remember that Pope Francis made a big thing about going out to the secularists and the radicals, and actually went round to the house of the leader of the Radical Party, whose name for a moment escapes me. She was a lady. She was suffering from cancer. I can't remember her name. You'll be able to put it in the show
Bonini.
notes. Who?
Bonini.
Yeah, Emma Bonino. Emma Bonino,
Bonino,
a
yeah.
massive enemy of the Catholic Church. He went and visited her at home. Whether Emma Bonino was converted to Catholicism in this way, I don't think was the case. But it did show that the Holy Father saw nobody as beyond the pale.
Well, as every Holy Father before him has as well. I mean, he was not unique in that respect. This is Christ's church on earth for everyone. Christ came for everyone.
John the 23rd was the one who, of course, went to Regina Coeli, to the jail. And, of course, so there was nothing special about going to jails and so on. There's a beautiful picture of John the 23rd, who, as you know, was enormously fat, wearing his galero and his red cape, and all these pious prisoners kneeling down in front of him and so on. And of course, so did St. John Paul II also went to jails and so on. One always goes, this idea of going to the margins is of course, goes back to Jesus Christ, the one who went and spoke to the Syro-Phoenician woman and whose daughter he healed. That was going to the margins.
Yeah. But they didn't have iPhones then, Father, so they weren't able to record it and post it on social media. So,
yes, I know the way these things are used in social media, and one of the things, of course, you've got to be aware of is when you're going to the margins, go to the margins by all means. I would certainly go to the margins, but don't do it as a virtue signaling sort of thing.
Yeah.
Look at me, aren't I cool? I go to the margins and so on and so forth. I mean, our Blessed Lord went out to the margins. He was very much criticized for it, wasn't he? I mean, hanging around with tax collectors and people like that.
Yeah, and what did they always do? Followed him.
Yes, that's true. I mean, St. Matthew left the tax collecting office and went off to become an apostle, and then, of course, later a martyr. And, of course, our Blessed Lord converted St. Matthew, which is beautifully illustrated, if you remember, by Caravaggio in San Luigi dei Francesi in Rome. Our modern going to the margins is not such a great success, unfortunately. One of the things is, we're committed to dialogue, but what we don't have is partners in dialogue.
So we hear,
we don't have partners in dialogue. I mean, I don't think the Chinese are reputable partners in dialogue. I don't think the Saudis are interested in dialogue very much. I don't think the mullahs are interested in Iran, are interested in dialogue very much. I don't think
no, they're not. Neither Israel. It's a whole other question which we'll have to discuss another day, I think. But it's a good point, and to some extent, one could say it's some relinquishing of the authority of the church that has led to so many groups unable to dialogue that has caused us to be in this position. But as I said, I don't think we can embark upon that conversation 1 hour in.
So the young Pope. Have you seen that, Father? The young Pope.
No, you made me watch the young Pope.
Did I? Yeah.
I don't have Netflix.
He just goes, no more dialogue, shuts the doors, puts the papal tiara on. That's what we need, I think.
Well,
more of that.
Don't forget, the papal tiara is dialogue.
I think you're right.
Because it's so fantastic to look at. You think, what is that? What is it saying to me? Beauty is dialogue. Caravaggio was dialogue. This picture really
although that's an interesting point. What you said there, that's not dialogue. That's saying that's the word presented that you are so in awe of that you fall to your knees. That's saying, here's the thing that you're looking for, and you have found it, and it's communicated in this way. That's not our modern understanding of dialogue.
Actually, the person who criticized dialogue the most was Karl Barth, the famous Protestant theologian, because he said, and it's, he was a Protestant, he was wrong about quite a lot, but he was right about certain things, a bit like Andrea Dworkin. He said, the Catholic Church has turned to dialogue, but the church is not about dialogue per se, it's about proclamation. Now, that makes you think, doesn't it? It's about proclamation. One of the things I possibly could say is the church is about communication. And if you look at the Vatican, the number one place that has to be overhauled in the Vatican is the communication department, because it's not very good. And in fact, in its communications in recent times, it's been disastrous. There are some, but just recently, I just don't think, since Pope Leo came on the scene, it's been a lot better. because they just let Pope Leo communicate by just being himself. But there were certain things in the past which were really bad, I thought, which gave the wrong message entirely.
Yeah. Well,
But
do
let's
you
not
think we'll? Do you
criticize the
think?
Vatican.
No, let's not criticize the Vatican. Us? Come on, have you not met
Come on.
us?
No,
Well,
no,
this
not
is what
yourself.
puts us in. This is what puts us, you know, like you said a prayer before we started, and in that prayer you said, "Let us build up the church." That is all we're about, and it
Yeah.
makes it so difficult because we've got a catechism, you know, we're like that. Catherine and I are reading at the moment, you know, and going through. We've got scripture, the magisterium, the tradition, and it's when our priests and our bishops don't follow those things that we're all sort of scratching our heads, because that's we need to be encouraged to do that, don't we?
Yeah, I think dialogue is actually possibly to prepare the ground for proclamation. But incidentally, proclamation, I'll just go back to a point I made right at the beginning. The most effective proclamation today is the witness of holy lives. The blessed
Absolutely.
Carlo, Acutis, and the blessed Pier, Girgio, and all those other saints and blesseds I mentioned, Saint Francis, obviously, Saint Clare, Don Bosco, the blessed Cafasso, and the blessed Alemanno. These people proclaim the message loud and strong. And it's attributed to Saint Francis. It may be true. He said, "Preach always, and sometimes use words."
That's
I
beautiful.
think that probably is misattributed. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
Is it? It might be. It might be. But he did say that about Assisi. I wish I could find the quote. I photographed it. He said, "You know, the town of Assisi will, throughout the ages, bring people to God, and the bricks of Assisi will preach."
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're called to holiness. We should live holy lives, and that should be a witness for others.
Yeah.
And I do think that's what we try to do and try to say, isn't it, Mark, in our work?
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, I mean, I just pulled up that quote there from St. Claude de Colombière, who said, "One must be a saint in order to make saints." You know, so give us, Lord, give us holy priests and bishops. You know,
yeah, absolutely. And of course, these saints who will be saints on Sunday, they were formed by the spirit of Saint Francis, the spirit of Don Bosco, I think, the spirit of Assisi, and the spirit of Turin. And so I would say to every Catholic, I'm not a travel agent, but go to Assisi, go to Turin. Those are the two most important cities from the point of view of modern Catholicism, as far as I'm concerned. They're both beautiful.
Wonderful.
That's great food in Turin, by the way.
Well, Mark and I might have been talking about possibly going to do some recording there and sharing some footage. And well, I was just going to say, what better guide than Father Alexander Lucie-Smith, especially if you know where all the good eateries are, Father.
What she says. Okay. What she said. I mean, Turin would be lovely to go to Turin. Turin is, and Assisi is just heartbreaking. Assisi, and our hearts need to be broken so they can be rebuilt by Christ, because we become hard-hearted people. So, I mean, Assisi is just wonderful, and Turin's wonderful, and the Catholic Church is wonderful. Rejoice.
As have you been, Father Alexander Lucie-Smith. So thank you for joining us today. And hopefully, we've talked about having you on as often as you're able and giving us a run through of the events going on in the church over the past week. So you'll join us again, I'm sure. We really appreciate it. Thank you for all you've done. We can wait in hope that Pope Leo might issue a statement like the Queen did on Meghan, saying recollections may vary about about meeting Father James Martin, but we may live in hope. Anyway, for now, thank you, Father. Thank you to all of you watching. Do visit our website, catholicunscripted.com. And if you want access to all our articles and exclusive videos, just pick up a subscription. For now, God bless and thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.